They laughed at him every morning, not because he did anything wrong, but because he never corrected them. He cleaned their offices. He stayed invisible. And he listened. The day he didn't show up, no one cared. 3 days later, one letter changed how the entire building breathed. For nearly 12 years, Samuel Ibekwe arrived at the same office complex before sunrise. He wore the same faded blue uniform, carried the same worn-out broom, and greeted people with the same gentle nod. Most ignored him. Some mocked him. A few went further. They spilled coffee on the floor and watched him clean it. They joked loudly about how this is all he'll ever be. They laughed when he asked politely for space. Samuel never reacted. Not once. Unaware, they thought silence meant weakness. The building was one of those glass towers that reflected the sky during the day and glowed like a lantern at night. 32 floors of corporate ambition, polished marble, and people racing towards something they called success. Samuel knew every inch of it, every corner that gathered dust, every window that caught fingerprints, every elevator button that needed extra cleaning. He would arrive at 4:47 a.m. every morning. Not 4:45, not 4:50, always 4:47. He would unlock the service entrance with a key so old it had worn smooth in places, and he would begin his ritual. First, the lobby, then the stairs, then floor by floor, working his way up while the city still slept. By the time the first employees arrived at 7:30, the building would already smell faintly of lemon cleaner and effort, but nobody noticed. To them, cleanliness was simply the default state of the world. They never wondered who made it that way. Samuel worked on the executive floors. Floors where men in suits discussed millions. Floors where women in heels talked about investments and power. Yet Samuel moved through them like a ghost. One executive once said loudly, "Imagine being his age and still sweeping floors." Laughter followed. Samuel lowered his head and continued cleaning. Unaware, they never noticed. He arrived earlier than everyone. He left later than everyone. He cleaned places no one asked him to, and he paid attention to everything. The executive floors were different from the rest. The carpet was thicker. The art on the walls had little plaques with names and dates. The coffee was imported. The water had cucumber slices in it. And the people who worked there carried themselves with a specific kind of confidence that came from believing they were important. Samuel had learned to make himself smaller in those spaces. He would wait until meeting rooms emptied before entering. He would pause his work if someone needed to walk past. He would apologize even when others bumped into him. There was Marcus Chen, the VP of Operations, who would snap his fingers when he needed something cleaned immediately. He never said please. He never said thank you. He just pointed, snapped, and expected obedience. There was Jennifer Holloway, the chief marketing officer, who once complained to management that the cleaning staff made too much noise during her morning calls. After that, Samuel learned to clean her floor in complete silence, barely letting his broom touch the ground. There was Derek Armstrong, a senior analyst who was always in a hurry. He would rush through hallways with his phone pressed to his ear, knocking into Samuel's cart without breaking stride. Once he spilled an entire cup of coffee on the floor, glanced back at Samuel, and said, "You've got that, right?" Before walking away. Samuel always had it. But what they didn't see was how Samuel would linger sometimes after cleaning a conference room, how he would glance at the whiteboards covered in strategy plans and financial projections, how he would read the documents left carelessly on tables, how his eyes would scan quarterly reports that executives thought were too boring for anyone to bother with. They never noticed that Samuel understood every word. They never noticed that behind his quiet eyes was a mind that had once built empires. What no one knew was that Samuel once owned 3 companies. What no one knew was that he had signed deals that changed entire industries. What no one knew was that he had lost his wife, his only son, his desire to be seen. Years ago, after a tragic accident and a legal battle that followed, Samuel vanished from public life. He sold everything, donated most of it, and chose obscurity. Cleaning was not punishment. It was peace. Before the uniform, before the broom, Samuel Ibekwe had been someone else entirely. In the late 1992s, his name appeared in business journals and financial newspapers. He had started with nothing, a young immigrant from Nigeria who arrived with an engineering degree and relentless ambition. His first company manufactured industrial components. His second revolutionized supply chain logistics. His third invested in emerging technologies before anyone understood their potential. By his early 40s, Samuel was worth more than most people could count. He and his wife, Amara, had built a life that seemed untouchable. They lived in a home with more rooms than they needed. They traveled to places most people only saw in photographs. They gave generously to causes they believed in. And they had a son, David, who was brilliant and kind and full of possibility. David was studying medicine. He wanted to work in underserved communities. He talked about opening clinics in places that had been forgotten. Samuel had never been more proud of anyone in his entire life. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in March. David was driving home from a volunteer shift at a community health center. A truck ran a red light. The impact was instant. David died before the ambulance arrived. Amara never recovered. The grief consumed her like a slow fire. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped seeing the world as a place worth living in. 6 months after David's funeral, she took her own life. Samuel buried his wife next to his son, and then he buried himself. The legal battle that followed the accident was brutal. The trucking company tried to avoid responsibility. Lawyers stretched the case across 2 years. Samuel won eventually, but the victory felt hollow. No amount of money could return what had been taken. The settlement went to a foundation in David's name. Samuel sold his companies, liquidated his assets, set up trusts and scholarships and funds that would outlive him. And then he disappeared. He chose the janitorial job intentionally. It required no decisions, no leadership, no visibility. It was repetitive, physical, and mercifully simple. Every day was the same. Every task had a clear beginning and end. There was comfort in that. Cleaning became a meditation. Sweeping away dirt felt like sweeping away memory. Polishing glass felt like trying to see through grief. Arriving before dawn meant fewer people, fewer questions, fewer reminders of who he used to be. Samuel didn't want pity. He didn't want recognition. He wanted to disappear into routine until the pain became bearable. Most days, it almost worked. One afternoon, a young manager tripped over Samuel's bucket. Furious, he shouted, "Watch where you put your trash, old man." Security was called. Samuel apologized even though it wasn't his fault. They warned him. That night, Samuel stayed late and cleaned the entire floor alone. Unaware, they thought they had power over him. The young manager's name was Kyle Peterson, 29 years old, MBA from a decent school, 3 years with the company. He wore expensive watches and talked loudly about his personal brand. He had the kind of confidence that came from never truly failing at anything. Kyle was rushing to a meeting when his foot caught the edge of Samuel's bucket. Water splashed across the marble floor. Kyle stumbled but didn't fall. His shoes got wet. His pants got splattered. His ego got bruised. He spun around, face flushed. "Are you serious right now?" Samuel immediately bent to clean the spill. "I'm sorry, sir. Let me." "You're sorry?" Kyle's voice carried down the hallway. People slowed to watch. "You leave your trash in the middle of the floor, and you think sorry fixes it?" "It was against the wall, sir. I was cleaning the—" "I don't care where you think you put it." Kyle stepped closer. "Do you know how much these shoes cost? Do you have any idea?" Samuel kept his eyes down. "I'll clean this up right away." "You'll do more than that." Kyle pulled out his phone. "I'm calling security. This is negligence. This is—" "Kyle." Another voice cut through the tension. It was Robert Chen, Marcus's younger brother, who worked in HR. "Come on, man. It was an accident." "An accident?" Kyle gestured at his pants. "Look at this." "I see it. But security? Really?" Kyle hesitated, then pointed at Samuel. "I want him reported. I want this documented." Robert sighed. "Fine. I'll file a report." Two security guards arrived. They knew Samuel. They had worked alongside him for years. One of them, a man named Jerome, gave Samuel an apologetic look. "We've got to follow protocol, Sam, you understand?" Samuel nodded. "Of course." They took him to a small office. Asked him what happened. Wrote everything down. The building manager, a woman named Patricia who had always treated Samuel with basic decency, reviewed the incident. She gave Samuel a verbal warning. "I know it wasn't your fault," she said quietly, "but I have to document this. Just be extra careful, okay?" "I will," Samuel said. That night, after everyone left, Samuel returned to the floor where it happened. He cleaned it more thoroughly than he ever had before. He scrubbed grout with a toothbrush. He polished every surface until it gleamed. He worked until his back ached and his hands cramped. Not because he had to, because it was the only way he knew how to respond. The next morning, Kyle walked across that same floor in fresh shoes and never noticed how perfect it looked. Weeks later, Samuel didn't show up. No broom, no bucket, no quiet nod. People yoked. Guess the janitor finally quit. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, management received a letter, a sealed letter, addressed to the building. The first person to notice Samuel's absence was Jerome from security. He arrived at 5:30 a.m. for his shift and realized the lobby hadn't been cleaned. The glass doors still had yesterday's fingerprints. The floors hadn't been mopped. The trash bins near the elevators were full. "That's weird," Jerome muttered to his partner. "Sam's always here by now." By 8 a.m., other people noticed. The executive floors felt different. Coffee spills sat uncleaned. Trash cans overflowed. The building had a subtle layer of disorder that no one had experienced in years. Patricia called Samuel's phone. It rang and rang. No answer. She called the emergency contact he had listed, a neighbor named Mrs. Chen who lived in his apartment building. Mrs. Chen's voice was soft and sad. "You didn't hear? Mr. Samuel passed 3 days ago. I found him. He went peacefully, in his sleep." Patricia felt her chest tighten. "Oh my God. The funeral home took him yesterday. There's no family to contact. I've been trying to figure out what to do with his things." Patricia hung up and sat in silence for a long moment. Then she sent an email to all staff. "It is with deep sadness that we inform you that Samuel Abekwe, our facilities staff member for 12 years, has passed away. Details to follow." The responses were muted. A few people replied with brief condolences. Most ignored it. Life continued. Meetings happened. Deals closed. The building kept spinning. On the 4th day after Samuel's death, a courier arrived with a sealed envelope. It was addressed to the management and staff of Tower Plaza. The return address was a law firm downtown. Patricia opened it in her office. Inside was a letter, written in Samuel's precise handwriting, along with several legal documents. She read the first paragraph and felt the air leave her lungs. The letter explained everything. Samuel had passed peacefully in his sleep. Attached were documents, proof of ownership, trust papers, donation records. Samuel had been the silent benefactor funding staff medical bills, scholarships for employees' children, emergency relief funds. The entire building had survived layoffs because of him. The janitor they mocked had been the reason they still had jobs. Patricia called an emergency meeting. She invited department heads, executives, HR, and security. She stood at the front of the conference room holding the documents, and when she spoke, her voice shook. Samuel Abekwe was not just a janitor, she began. She explained who he had been, the companies he had built, the fortune he had accumulated, the unimaginable loss he had suffered, the choice he had made to disappear, and then she explained what he had been doing all along. 3 years ago, when the company faced bankruptcy, an anonymous donor had provided emergency funding that kept them afloat. That donor was Samuel. For the past 5 years, medical bills that employees couldn't afford had been mysteriously paid. Dental work, surgeries, cancer treatments. The payments came from an employee wellness fund that no one could trace. That fund was Samuel. Over a dozen employees' children had received scholarships for college. Full rides. The foundation sponsoring them was registered under a name no one recognized. Samuel had created it. When the pandemic hit and the company struggled, when layoffs seemed inevitable, another anonymous donation arrived, enough to save 43 jobs. That was Samuel, too. He had been watching, listening, paying attention to every overheard conversation about medical debt, every whispered worry about tuition, every stressed discussion about mortgages and bills, and he had helped. Silently, invisibly, the people in the conference room sat frozen. Marcus Chen, who had snapped his fingers at Samuel for years, looked like he might be sick. Jennifer Holloway covered her mouth with both hands. Derek Armstrong stared at the table. "There's more," Patricia said quietly. She held up another document. Samuel left instructions. "He's donated this building." "What?" someone whispered. "He purchased the building 8 years ago through a shell company. None of us knew. He's now donated it to a trust that will keep rent affordable and ensure stability for all current tenants and employees." She paused. "He's given us our future." The room was silent except for the sound of someone crying. Kyle Peterson, the young manager who had shouted at Samuel and called security, stood up and walked out. No one stopped him. No one laughed anymore. Executives stood frozen. The young manager who shouted at him couldn't speak. That corner Samuel cleaned every morning? No one touched it. They placed flowers there instead. The corner was on the 23rd floor, near the east windows where morning light came through. Samuel had cleaned it every single day for 12 years. He would sweep it carefully, then wipe down the windowsill, then stand there for just a moment looking out at the city waking up. After the revelation, someone placed a small bouquet of flowers there. By the next morning, there were a dozen bouquets. By the end of the week, the corner had become a memorial. People left notes. "I'm sorry I never saw you. Thank you for my daughter's education. You saved my life when you paid for my surgery. I never knew it was you. Forgive me." Jennifer Holloway, who had complained about noise, left a framed photo of her son graduating from college. "Because of you," the note read, "he has no debt. Because of you, he has a future. I will never forget." Marcus Chen left his expensive watch. No note, just the watch, placed carefully among the flowers. Derek Armstrong came to the corner every morning before work. He would stand there in silence for exactly 5 minutes, then go to his office. He did this every day for months. Kyle Peterson left the company. He sent a resignation letter that simply said, "I can't be here anymore." No one knew where he went. The building felt different after Samuel's death. Quieter, more careful. People held doors for the new cleaning staff. They said thank you and please. They picked up after themselves. They noticed. Jerome from security started a tradition. Every morning at 4:47 a.m., he would unlock the service entrance, stand there for a moment, and say quietly, "Morning, Sam." Then he would begin his shift. The city didn't literally go silent. Traffic still roared. Construction still hammered. Life continued its endless noise. But something had shifted. The people who knew Samuel's story carried it with them. They told others. The story spread through the business district like a slowly burning fire. Other buildings started treating their staff differently. Other companies started paying attention to the people they had overlooked. Other janitors, security guards, cafeteria workers, the invisible infrastructure of corporate life suddenly found themselves seen. Not everywhere, not perfectly, but enough to matter. After, they understood too late. Power doesn't always announce itself. Wealth doesn't always wear suits. And the quietest people often carry the heaviest stories. Samuel never wanted recognition, but his absence became the loudest lesson they would ever learn. A year after Samuel's death, the building dedicated a plaque in the lobby. It was simple, bronze, mounted near the entrance where everyone would see it. In memory of Samuel Abekwe, who taught us that dignity has nothing to do with position and everything to do with character. But the real memorial wasn't the plaque. It wasn't the flowers or the notes or the scholarships that continued in his name. The real memorial was the change in how people treated each other. It was the executive who learned the name of every staff member. It was the manager who started a fund to help employees with emergencies. It was the company that implemented policies protecting the lowest paid workers. It was the hundreds of small moments where someone chose kindness instead of cruelty, attention instead of dismissal, humanity instead of hierarchy. Samuel had spent 12 years invisible, and in his invisibility, he had built something more lasting than any company he'd ever owned. He had built a lesson that couldn't be ignored, that the measure of a person has nothing to do with their title, that the most powerful thing you can do is help others without needing them to know. That grace is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And sometimes the people we overlook are the very ones holding us up. Patricia retired 2 years later, but before she left, she did something unusual. She requested that her office be moved. She wanted to work from the 23rd floor, near the east windows, in that corner where Samuel used to stand every morning. "I want to see what he saw," she explained. "I want to start my day the way he did." From that corner, at sunrise, you could see the entire city spreading out below. Thousands of buildings, millions of people, all of them rushing towards something, believing they knew what mattered. Samuel had known better. He had learned the hard way that nothing you build lasts except the impact you have on others. That love and loss will strip away everything except what's essential. That the only real power is the power to serve without recognition. Every morning, when light filled that corner, it felt like he was still there, still watching, still quietly changing everything. If you've ever judged someone too quickly, if you've ever been underestimated, if you believe quiet strength deserves respect, subscribe. Because stories like this remind us who we should never overlook.